Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so excited to be here with you and share with you some updates on our Read to Achieve policy as it relates to retention and instructional support. So as the 2019 Burroughs Welcome Fund North Carolina Teacher of the Year, I sit on the state board in an advisory role. Recently, the issue of our Read to Achieve law, with specific concern to how districts are retaining students who do not meet the Read to Achieve pathway after third grade, has been brought up to the State Board of Education. I was asked to share what Moore County Schools does with regard to retention, as well as analyze the law to make recommendations for how to better fit our third grade students who do not meet proficiency. After my presentation, Dr. Grimacy invited me to share this presentation with the regional superintendents of the Sandhill region, and they were so supportive that they asked me to come here and share with you all this afternoon my presentation to help us in our advocacy for students who do not meet proficiency. So I'm really excited to share with you some things that I've discovered when I really dug into the law and the practice in my reflections. So when I started looking at General Statute 115C83, which focuses on our Read to Achieve law in North Carolina, I was very compelled by the two issues that emerged with regards to retention and instructional support. At the beginning of this law, it notes the purpose of the law, and the purpose is really to provide early intervention, support, and instructional help for students who are not proficient in reading K-3, and that's defined as 115C83 in the Purpose A section. Purpose B is where we get into the retention and promotion issues. But I would like to note that in that general purpose, it indicates that retention of a student should only in part be because of third grade reading proficiency. And the fact that they add the words in part tells us that this is a piece of the puzzle, but not the whole equation when we're looking at whether to retain a student who does not meet proficiency. So let's jump into what Moore County Schools does, which is in line with districts across our state when we do not meet reading proficiency. Students who do not demonstrate reading proficiency by the end of third grade are offered support during our optional summer reading camps. Students who go to summer reading camps work towards proficiency in one of four ways. They can have a successful completion of their Read to Achieve portfolio that they began with their classroom teacher during their third grade year. They can meet a passing score on the Read to Achieve test, which is administered at the end of summer reading camp. They can have a passing score of a level P on M-Class. This was prior to summer reading camp that's coming up in 2020 with the introduction of iStation. This was our benchmark up until the end of last summer. As well as they can meet proficiency with a Lexile score of a 725 or higher on the reading inventory. The question comes in when students do not meet those pathways at the end of summer reading camp. And this was the crux of the concern that was brought up to the State Board of Education if local LEAs are in compliance with the law. So I've outlined what Moore County Schools does if students do not meet that proficiency pathway, and then I have the Read to Achieve law and policy that supports these actions. So students who do not demonstrate reading proficiency by the end of summer reading camp will be retained under General Statute 115C83(7)A. Students will be placed in a transitional third or fourth grade class, and these students will have at least 90 minutes of uninterrupted reading instructions, and they will automatically qualify for reading instruction and support through intervention programs. Students will retake the Read to Achieve test by November 1st, and if they pass that test or meet proficiency by November 1st, the retention label will be removed. Students who show reading proficiency will then be promoted to fourth grade status. The Read to Achieve law defines third, fourth transitional classes as a class that's working towards fourth grade reading mastery skills. And that's important to note that Read to Achieve law does define that. And so when we're talking about a third, fourth combination class, it is perfectly within the construct of the law to be a class that's working towards fourth grade standards as defined by General Statute 115C, 83, B, and C. So like I said, the question came up over retention. And so when I dug into the law to look at retention, I really saw that districts like Moore County Schools are well within the construct of the Read to Achieve law. But something else stuck out to me while I was reading the general statute. What stuck out to me is how many times instructional support was mentioned in this law. And every educator that you bring to the table can tell you, retention is just one part of the puzzle when it comes to students who are not reading proficiently. Instead of focusing on retention and putting students back in third grade and doing more of the same, I think every educator across North Carolina can really speak to the importance of providing deep, meaningful instructional support for our students who struggle in a systematic way to help meet those reading deficiencies. So I argue after reading this law that we should shift our focus and our conversation away from retention as a remediation tool and towards a system of substantial statewide instructional support. I believe this is supported by the general statute law, and I have highlighted in yellow all the times that the words instructional services or support services show up within the Read to Achieve law. In 115C 83.2, the law notes the purpose of this part is to ensure that students receive appropriate instruction and support services to address difficulty with reading development. In 115C 83.6, it talks about kindergarten readiness and the importance of early intervention. And the law speaks to students who are diagnosed at the beginning of kindergarten with behaviors that is going to make reading difficult. It notes that students should have diagnostic assessments and shall be addressed with instructional supports and services. When we're looking at early grade reading proficiency in 115C 83.6, the law notes that instructional supports and services shall address oral language, phonological and phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. The law goes on in the section that notes that we should eliminate social promotion and say that students should receive instructional supports and services and reading interventions appropriate for their age and their reading level. In 2, it notes that students with disabilities, and although that phrase does not include the word instructional support, we know that in K3 students are diagnosed with with learning disabilities through an intense level of tiered instructional supports to prove that there's a need for EC services, and that relies on instructional support. It also then goes on to say that students who have disabilities that might qualify under the Good Cause Exempt law shall receive intensive reading interventions for at least 2 years before being labeled Good Cause Exempt. In 115C 83.75, it again notes that students should get reading interventions. And then finally in 83.A-B, it notes that other appropriate instructional supports and reading interventions shall be made available to students. And so the law clearly defines this need for instructional supports, but yet we're focusing on retention, which in my opinion misses the mark when it comes to how we're going to help students improve their reading to pass their end of the year testing for third grade. And instead of focusing on retention as the crux of the issue, if we go back to what's supported by the law, we need to focus on intense instructional supports and services that the students need in order to improve proficiency. So ways that we can do this are a three-pronged approach. I argue that we should have research-based interventions programs developed through our MTSS model, our multi-tiered systems of support. This is a research-based model that has been proven to address reading proficiencies, especially in schools of high poverty with large gaps in reading proficiency. However, there's a lack of funding for our MTSS support framework, and so schools are having to do Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions without established programs and without established personnel to help aid those systems of support. And so I believe that our state needs to make an effort to fully fund MTSS so that we can use that as a tool to deliver these interventions. We need support personnel back in our schools. We need instructional coaches. We need reading coaches. We need instructional assistants in order to help us fully enable our personnel at the local level to develop instructional supports across our schools. Most non-Title I schools across North Carolina do not have reading coaches and do not have interventionists. Yet they have students who are not meeting proficiency. And those students fall through the cracks when they are not able to have programs and personnel dedicated to improving their reading instruction. And then the last prong that I argue in my three-prong approach is the development of our professional development for reading instruction across the state. There's an effort to move towards the science of reading in North Carolina, where we have a strong phonemic and phonics-based instructional model to help reach the needs of all of our students in our school. If we want to do that, we have to provide intense professional development for teachers to learn these methodologies so that they can help reach students in a systematic approach across North Carolina, and partner with our EPPs, our education provider programs, so that professional development is happening before students who are graduating from college enter the workforce. If we're able to successfully fund these three areas, I believe we will make a shift away from retention as the driving focus of our instruction towards true instructional support that can help our students who are not at grade level. So in conclusion, if we think about this as Read to Achieve Law being at the center of our conversation regarding reading development by third grade, we have to understand that retention and promotion is just one piece of the puzzle, but it's not the focal point or the driving factor. Professional development, personnel support, and curriculum support are the core functions of what we are called to do as educators to help meet the needs of all of our students. Thank you. So the question is if in kindergarten and first grade classes where there are teacher assistants able to help, if that increases the reading instruction in the classrooms. I don't know the answer from a research perspective, but I know anecdotally traveling the state, I see teachers' assistants step into instructional roles that really further the development of students. When instructional assistants or teacher assistants are asked to step into reading groups and help the reading instruction in the class versus covering recess or lunch duty or things like that, you see an amazing ability for students to be touched twice daily by teachers or instructional assistants in the reading block. And that is a huge asset to our schools. Do I think that the intervention piece is fully funded in order to successfully carry out the law of Read to Achieve? From my opinion, no, it is not. I think that we are not seeing enough funding from the General Assembly in order to fully carry out the law that has been passed for Read to Achieve, and that if we want to be within the statute, that there has to be funding from the state, systematic funding of professional development, of curriculum programs and development, and of personnel to be able to stay within the statute. Thank you. Thank you.